And now I am so happy to welcome to the podcast Mike Ozanian. He is an assistant managing editor of Forbes magazine. He has been there since '97 for 30 years or more. Mike has been gauging and watching team valuations. And now we are on the very brink of a huge sale. The Washington Redskins, now the Commanders, going to sell for $6 billion. And that proposal is now under consideration. And so Mike's here to tell us about it and tell us about the real inside story. Thanks so much for being here, Mike Ozanian. Well, first of all, let's just start with that price tag. What do you think of $6 billion? Isn't it the highest valuation ever for a sports team?
Hey, Dennis, great being with you, my friend. Yes, it absolutely will be. This is on the heels of a year ago, the Denver Broncos selling for $4.65 billion, which was a new record at that time. So this really speaks to the great business of the NFL.
Now, one thing that surprises me, Mike Ozanian of Forbes, is this team, the Redskins, has been through so much turmoil and trauma. And oh my gosh, it's got to change its name because that's now deemed to be racist. Never mind that changing the name didn't do that much to help Native Americans. And then it's had a scandal where the coach was fired because of things they found in an email from years before, et cetera, et cetera. How is it that didn't hurt the valuation of the Commanders?
Well, I think a lot of that may have hurt actually the valuation a little bit, Dennis, because it probably hurt the revenue of the team. I mean, if you look at the Redskins in the 2021 season, which was the latest for which we have full figures, the Commanders' revenue was $544 million, which was ninth in the NFL. So the way it really works economically in the NFL, 60% of your revenue is split evenly among all the teams, and that's largely from their national TV deals, which averages $12 billion a year. That gets divided up equally among the 32 teams.
A little bit of equity and socialism there.
Yeah,
equity and socialism.
What determines that pecking order is how much you generate from your stadium, tickets, premium seating, sponsorships at the stadium. So in the case of the Commanders, you're talking about FedEx Field, and I think that their revenue's been depressed. Their attendance hasn't been that good. The team hasn't been that good. But to your point about the valuation, the biggest single thing that really depresses the sale price of all NFL teams is the fact that unlike hockey or the NBA or Major League Baseball, they don't allow private equity money to come in. They don't allow foreign money to come in. If you're coming in as the control owner, that is, you have to own at least 30%. You have to come in with 30% equity, excluding a $1.1 billion of debt that you're allowed to put on. So if you're Josh Harris and you're buying this team and you're the control owner, baby, you got to come up with $2 billion of cash. So there aren't that many people that can afford that.
Now tell us, let's veer a little bit into Josh Harris. Roughly, I haven't looked them up. I'm guilty of this, Mike, and I apologize. I'm wondering about what his net worth is. How big of a bite is this for him, and how do he make his money?
Well, I made his money in private equity. He's a multi-billionaire. I think the NFL look at his track record he also owns the Philadelphia 76ers of the NBA. He owns the control owner of the New Jersey Devils of the NHL. And I think they'll look at what he's done there. You know, he's a guy who's run those teams. He hasn't ticked anybody off. They like the fact that he spends some money. He's viewed as a guy who's going to come in and be part of the good old boys club, if you will. Listen, you know this as well as I do, as somebody that's been an expert following business for many years. No deal is done till it's done, right? So when you're talking about Dan Snyder, if he gets another bid that comes in significantly more than $6 billion, who knows? He may take that bid.
Yeah. In fact, Mike, I was going to ask you how could Jeff Bezos let this get away from him? He's worth what, $100 or $140 billion or something. This is nothing for him. And at the same time, there's synergy between the Washington Commanders and the Washington Post, I'm sure, which he owns.
Knowing that I was going to do this podcast with you, a former editor of mine at Forbes, I knew I had to be prepared. So I actually put in some calls to people who really know this stuff. I mean, I'm talking about team owners and executives this morning.
Yeah.
And what I was told by guys that I view as very credible, and I asked that exact question, and what they told me was they said Bezos did not want to deal with Dan Snyder. You know, a little history here. As you mentioned, Bezos owns the Washington Post, and there's been a lot of bad ink spilled in that paper about Dan Snyder. I'm not going to say whether it was warranted, unwarranted, whatever, probably a little of both. And the other thing they said was they think Bezos really wants this Seattle football team, the Seattle Seahawks. He's got his eye on that.
Closer to home.
The late Paul Allen, when he passed, went to a trust that's run by his sister. And there's been some speculation. There's some tax issues involved in terms of if and when she sells it, when those tax benefits would expire. Be that as it may, they say that's the team that Bezos is really eyeing.
And then does the price tag have to start at far higher because it doesn't have the attendant turmoil and controversies that were attached to the Washington Commanders?
Well, it's a great franchise. And yes, to answer your question, the short answer is I think quite possibly yes. I would put the odds above 50% that it's yes, because remember this too. If you're coming in to buy the Commanders, it's a team that needs a new stadium. They've been trying to get one built, and you're not likely to get much public financing, taxpayer financing for a stadium down there, unlike, say, what's happening with the Bills, who are building a stadium largely with taxpayer financing. So you're coming in to buy the Commanders on top of the $6 billion, assuming that ends up being the price. If I'm Josh Harrison, you know what? I'm likely going to have to put in at least another $1.5 billion for a new stadium. Going to Seattle, they have a really good stadium there. There's no need for a new one. So I'm coming in there and I'm saying, you know what? I put money in. It's a one-time thing. I'm just buying the team. I don't need to put any money in down the road for a new stadium. So that's another reason why you could see a higher sale price for the Seahawks than we did the Commanders.
That is really good stuff, Mike Ozanian of Forbes. Let's zoom up on the typical NFL team as a business and compare. Oh, actually, one thing I was thinking about this. I think Dan Snyder paid $800 million for the Redskins in '99, perhaps.
Yeah,
like
there's some debate. I always use 750 simply because when he bought the team, there was 50 million of cash on the balance sheet.
Okay.
So I kind of subtract that out. But yeah, you know what? Either way, it was a heck of a deal.
There's like 24 years. But I just wonder if you put your money in 1999 in the S&P 500, how did it fare compared with this? Is it higher? Is it lower?
You know, I looked at it once, not recently compared to the $6 billion, but when I did the valuations last, I guess it was last August, I valued the Commanders at $5.6 billion. You would have done better because also in the Commanders,
you would have done better where?
With the Commanders, because remember, the Commanders are highly profitable. You're talking about a team that generates over $100 million in cash. So, you know, our old EBITDA number, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciate. So he's sucking money out of that.
On what revenue?
Yeah, man.
On what revenue? 100 million on what revenue?
On about 545 million in revenue.
So a lower than 20% margin, but that's certainly higher than the Apple iPhones.
He's putting it in his pocket, baby. You know, I'm taking it out. So you're talking total return. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, it sure is. And plus you have the largesse and the swag of owning an NFL team. And the very fact that the NFL won't let in private equity money or big backing. You know, I remember Disney buying the Ducks in hockey, that kind of thing. Baseball lets a whole lot of others in. But NFL remains this kind of swagger sport where you need one main owner, although they are allowed to bring in partners now, right?
That's right. So you could bring in, I forget the exact number, but you can bring in several limited partners. But the control person has got to put in, you know, it's got to own 30%. So the NFL like the NBA will allow, for instance, co-ownership. The NFL does not. So that sort of depresses the price, if you will, because you can't bring in somebody else that's also going to kick in an equal amount of money. So the one person's got to come in and be the king of cash when they buy the team.
Yeah, and now the starting bid is going to be $2 billion cash up front to get a $6 billion team like the troubled Washington Commanders, which are a money-losing team. That's the other thing, is that the team can be so profitable at a time when it's actually losing. Imagine what happens to that marginal growth rate if they actually turn into a winner. What is that difference, do you think, between a losing record and a winning record in terms of the finance and the bottom line?
Oh, it can play into what you charge for general tickets, what you charge for premium seating like suites and club seats, how much you can command for advertising. So it could be a very wide range. You could be talking about an extra $15 million a year. You could be talking about an extra, $40 to $50 million a year.
It's pretty extraordinary. It's a great business. And of course, one thing I hadn't quite anticipated when I was back at Forbes and you guys were tracking those team valuations is with the explosion of online and the explosion of content everywhere and the fragmentation of the dial far more so than we ever dreamed, that NFL football really still brings them in. It's the one place where millions of people gather at once to watch one national event, and that happens every week.
Yeah, there's no other content in the world like the NFL. I think it's the Hollywood Reporter every year, or maybe Ad Age, that puts out a list of the 50 most watched programs during the year. And I think if you look at the top 50, the NFL has like 35 or 40 of the top. Of course, the Super Bowl, the playoff games, and so forth. And, the NFL also, unlike baseball, basketball, and hockey right now, is not facing any stress from the fact that from local broadcast rights. So we saw Diamond Sports Group, of course, which owns the Bally RS regional sports networks. They filed for bankruptcy, because a lot of these people that, these especially young people, they don't go to TV anymore. They stream content. So people are cutting the cord.
Now, let me ask you about that, because the producer for Ricochet actually was talking to me beforehand, and he was mentioning, because he was in the whole sports broadcast business for a long time, and mentioning that, and he'll be cutting out this part right now because it refers to himself there, but mentioning indeed there's this incredible collapse going on in regional sports networks. And yet when I was covering at Fox Business, I remember people were wanting to get into that like crazy. ESPN was into it. Rupert Murdoch was into it. What went wrong? Is it just a glut of too much sports?
I think with Diamond, it was three things. It was the shift from people watching content on television to streaming it. I think that they paid too high a price for the RSNs, because don't forget, when Fox was selling the RSNs originally, they wanted us and the other assets to Disney at the time. They wanted Disney to buy it all. And the FCC came in and said to Disney, you could buy these other Hollywood assets or whatever, but you can't keep the RSNs because it would be sort of, we'd have some problems with that because you already own ESPN. So you sort of you couldn't get a full strategic buyer to come in. So when Diamond, which is owned by a subsidiary of Sinclair Broadcast Group, came in and bought it, they used so much debt to meet the price. It was like $8 billion of debt on like a $12 billion enterprise value for the purchase. So you had those two things happening at once: high price, too much debt at a time when people were cutting the cord. Like the NFL doesn't face that problem because, it's once a week and people will watch that. When these networks bought the linear rights, they also bought the streaming rights. So they got everything all at once. So the NFL is really sitting pretty, and does not. And then with the rise of problems the other leagues have.
Yes, and Mike Ozanian of Forbes, super valuation team expert, with the rise of betting apps, gambling apps, it makes the NFL's games even more valuable because people are watching that and betting on it. Yes.
Yes, and the shift to really what we've seen in betting is now it's what they call it, micro betting is the term they use, which is, basically you could bet on many, many things, instantly. So,
Yes.
is the next play a pass, a run? Is it, going to be a pass for over 5 yards? Is it going to, it's just insane. And they measure the engagement times. It's the increase in engagement that people have during this. And don't forget, besides that, the NFL also makes money by selling its data that it collects and all the statistics that it collects during games to the people like Sport Radar, who then sort of massage the data and sell it to, the bookmakers, the DraftKings. It's an insane business.
You know what?
But a lot
Mike
of growth
Ozanian, I learned when I was at Forbes, as a matter of fact, years ago, that every business often can have an entirely separate second business about the data. FedEx ships packages, but it also has the incredible data on all the packages and where they're going, et cetera. And that's a perfect example of what the NFL is doing. We're getting ready for the final lap here. And I remember back in the day with Forbes on Fox, we used to go on there and have so much fun. And you were a star of that show, willing to take on almost any controversy. And you must have really resented the Redskins controversy because, I looked into that, wrote about it at the time, and 95% of Native Americans in random sample surveys said, I've got no problem with that name. I mean, they want help with illiteracy, alcoholism, drug abuse, crime, poverty on the reservation. There still are reservations. And this whole controversy with the liberals pushing for it did nothing to change that or improve that. What do you say?
I agree 100%. And, I'm a big baseball fan too. I saw it with the Cleveland Indians becoming the Cleveland Guardians. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know when and if this will ever end, but I don't know if the name Commanders will even stick after this purchase, if we will see a new name, because I don't think too many people that are diehard Washington football fans even like the name Commanders.
Well, it does reek of toxic masculinity, Commanders and commanding. So I think that we'll have to name it after a flower or something. All right. Listen, Mike Ozanian, you are such a great guy for coming on. I love seeing you, man. I loved working with you at Forbes, and keep up the good fight. And I look forward to seeing more of your insights on these team valuations. Okay.
Right back at you, my friend. Great being with you again, Dennis.
Okay. Have a glorious day, sir.
You too. Thank you.
All right.